Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. This is a really interesting episode. I think you're going to enjoy it. We talk about some things that I really haven't explored much on the podcast before. I'm talking with Arianna Smith, and she talks about the joy and grief that she felt when she learned about being an HSP, and how she really wanted to be told that she wasn't an HSP. She's really skilled at talking about strategies and pacing for working with her HS traits. And she talks about that she hated feeling like she was flaky, that part of her that wanted to connect, but then didn't manage her energy as well as she wanted to. She does talk a lot about being in a work environment that didn't work for her and what she needed to do to make it work and how she needed to advocate for herself. And she also talks about the process of going through the grief, the bargaining, the frustration, acceptance, and not needing to identify as a highly sensitive person. And we talk about this because she mentioned this to me a couple months ago, and it was really profound. We talk about the gifts of being a highly sensitive person, and she asks, do I think that we have pain when we have gifts and we don't get to express those gifts? And we also talk about, for Arianna, she is recovering from having an eating disorder and how we use addiction sometimes to manage our sensitivities. She also talks about at work, they'd call her worst case scenario, Ari, which we talk about as really being a strength as far as being able to troubleshoot and predict, and it really ended up being a gift for her in this position. During the interview, I'm talking about something, and then something happened personally while we were recording, and I needed to cut this out. But what happened is I was in a really state of flow. When this thing happened while we were recording, I couldn't remember what I was talking about. And so we just kind of totally shift gears. I'm just giving you a heads up. I do jump on and I added a little to the recording, letting you know, like, okay, this is that place where it feels like we're on one train on the freeway and all of a sudden we're driving down a city street and you're going, what happened? I do think you're going to enjoy this episode, and it really has some amazing conversation. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can really help me out by rating and reviewing. If you go to the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com, go to the podcast page, click on the episode and scroll down. It will show you how to write a review on iTunes. It helps legitimize the podcast if you're willing to do that. Let me tell you a little bit about Arianna. Arianna Smith, LPC, she, her, is a therapist and business coach for highly sensitive people. Raised in rural Alaska, Arianna learned early on the beauty and challenges of being highly sensitive. Today, she guides HSPs to release the stigma of being sensitive to craft a vibrant, soulful life and business. Based in Denver, Colorado, she provides trauma-informed psychotherapy to HSPs and the LGBTQ community, while offering business coaching and writing services to sensitive entrepreneurs across the globe. Outside of the office, she can be found exploring trails with her puppy or searching for the perfect Earl Grey blend. And now, on to the show. Hey, Arianna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
My mood is not where I want it to be, and I'm a little pissed off, to be honest with you. How are you?
I'm doing okay. My puppy is feeling better, so I am happy. So connected. As an HSP, my mood's so connected to my little furry animals. I'm doing good.
Yeah, I totally hear you. Well, you and I have been friends for, I don't know, over a year or two. We've never met in person. We connect via social media and via text and Voxer sometimes. I was totally looking forward to this chat. And right before we started to record, you asked what was going on or like if I was okay. I'm like, I'm having some big feelings and it's kind of pissing me off. And I realized I had this expectation that like, we're just going to have this fun chat and I want to show up and be a certain way. So, what I know how to do is to name what's going on. And It is what it is.
Aw. Aw. Thanks, Patricia. I mean, we've known each other since 2017, I think.
Has it been that long?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, because it was a Facebook group for therapists, right? And then we had a similar niche, and then I can't remember how it went, but yeah, so it's been actually a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, do you know that you and I were texting back and forth on Messenger when I was coming up with the name for the podcast, and you are the first person that actually heard the name Unapologetically Sensitive because we were just brainstorming together.
Right. Oh my gosh, I remember that moment. I was at this little coffee shop called Hello Coffee. Yeah, I remember that. And us messaging about it and which should the title be. And yes, it was so exciting being part of the birth of the podcast, being privy to that, witnessing that.
Yeah. All right, let's stay in order. We're going to follow the rules.
That's not our specialty, Patricia.
I know. Do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
Oh my gosh, yes. Definitely.
And when did you find out you were an HSP?
So I had just moved to a new city, not where I live now. And I discovered the Meetup app. This was maybe 2015, 2014. I can't remember. Doesn't matter. And I was looking for meetups and I saw there was a meetup for highly sensitive people. I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And then just like any HSP, I went down this rabbit hole and did the self-test and read all this stuff. And back in the day, there wasn't as much literature as there is now. And so mostly I was just reading about it. And I don't know about you, Patricia. I don't know if you've talked about this. When I started to realize I was an HSP, I had a little bit of like an identity crisis in a way. There was a little bit of a grief bargaining process happening. But anyway, so I went to this meetup for HSPs in this city and just connected with the people there and learned more about it and did my own research. Finally started to really embrace the term, embrace that part of me, and then started to work professionally with HSPs as well.
Can you say a little bit more about the grief and bargaining that came up for you? Because I'm curious, and we've never really talked about this before.
We haven't. This meetup was run by someone who was like a coach for HSPs. And I remember just always feeling different when I was growing up and just feeling really aware and just overwhelmed really easily. And on some level, I think it was maybe a little bit more muted than other people as a kid, because I grew up in like rural Alaska, right? The opposite of overstimulating. And my childhood was spent playing in the woods and like trying to avoid moose in the woods and watch out for bears and, swim in the lake. And then in the snow, in the winters, playing in the snow, right? And so I didn't really start to feel different until I got more into high school. And I always kind of felt it as a kid. And so I think coming in as an adult, I think on some level, I always wanted there to be some kind of like diagnosis or, something, not necessarily a diagnosis, but like something, some kind of supplement or a pill I could take or, something with my brain that would not make me so sensitive and so easily overwhelmed. And so there was a little bit of this grief process when there was this joy and this grief, right? Of, oh my gosh, there's people like me, like this is the thing. But then there is also this grief of like, oh my gosh, this is what, there is no end to this. This is just how I'm going to be for the rest of my life. And this is just something I have to work on for the rest of my life. The woman that ran this group, I remember doing a consult call with her. And I hadn't yet at that time fully identified as a highly sensitive person, but I did this call with her. And I remember I was sitting in my room, really vividly remembering this. And I called her and had this consult with her because I wanted her to tell me I wasn't an HSP. I wanted her to tell me it was something else. And then she said, based on what you've shared, there's no reason I can see that you're not a highly sensitive person. That was the moment when I was like, okay, all right. It is time to start embracing this and learning about this and just accepting that with this trait, I am going to have to do things differently. I'm not going to, I know you've talked about this on your podcast, but I'm definitely an extroverted HSP. I'm definitely high sensation seeking in certain ways. There was this grief also that these urges and these passions that I had for being, more social or being more out in the world had to be tempered with the need to manage having such a sensitive nervous system, and knowing that if I didn't manage all of that about me, then there would be the fallout of like sensory overload, which is just so uncomfortable. And I'm sure every HSP knows what that is and wants to avoid that too.
Sure. And it's interesting. I love that you're talking about this because I think that this goes on for a lot of people when they learn about the trait. Let me know how this lands with you. I find it interesting because you'd been an HSP all along. You still were extroverted. You were still a high sensation seeker. Naming it meant that there was grief around it and having to learn how to manage it. But I guess my question is, how were you managing it up until then when you didn't know what it was?
I would just, it's funny. My initial thought, Patricia, was like, not much differently, but now I see I'm more strategic about my days and about my commitments. So I think the way it looked before is I was incredibly burnt out in most of my jobs because they were not only just stressful, very stressful, high demand jobs, but I wasn't pacing myself accordingly. My biggest thing, I don't feel this so much anymore, but I think when I was younger, I always hated feeling flaky. And I know now that that is just related to being on some levels like an extroverted HSP that really, really loves connections with people and doesn't always have the nervous system to sustain as much social energy as I want to exert and engage in. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. Just like when you say how I was managing it before, like what was I doing?
Well, and I feel like my question's a little insensitive. So I guess my first question is how did that question land with you? Did it feel insensitive?
No, I think I just wanted to answer it the right way.
I totally get that. I totally get that.
What's the right answer? Just tell me.
I've been on podcasts and they ask me questions that I'm not comfortable with, and I haven't been able to say like, I don't like talking about that. And so I just give an answer out in left field. And when I listen back to it, I'm like, yeah, so totally get it. I think what was going on for me is like, we come the way that we're wired and we're doing our life, and then we learn about the trait. And I think any reaction or response we have is totally fine. But what I heard you say was, that it was upsetting and that you'd have to do life differently. And it's like, well, you were already doing life anyways, and now you just have a name for it. So what really was the anger really about now that you know what it is, you have to do things differently? Like, I as much as I don't care for Dr. Phil, it's like, so how was that working for you before you knew you were an HSP?
So I think the grief was around things are not going to get easier without me changing. So it was the realization that there's a trade-off.
Right.
That yes, I can go and socialize for X amount of hours, but my nervous system is going to pay the price. So it was more that like, this isn't something that I'm going to like outgrow or eventually acclimate to. It was, okay, so you are going to have to be more selective about how you spend your time. I'm thinking about like the workplace. One of my jobs was in an environment that was in like cubicles and open cubicles, right? And was very based on, just being available. And there was a lot of distractions. There was fluorescent lights. There was just a lot of interruptions. It was hard to get work done.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like, that was an example of where it was like, okay, like I'm going to have to advocate for myself in order to do a good job in that environment. I can't just like grin and bear it. You know, I'm going to have to advocate to have more days to work at home, or I'm going to have to be strategic. What I ended up doing was just doing that, advocating for some work from home days so that I would not be as overstimulated and able to get my work done. And then also just being really strategic about when I was in the office, and basically having the mentality when I was in the office, like, okay, you're going to be too distracted to get work done. So you're going to be going into the office to build connections with your coworkers as opposed to get this report done or to make this phone call. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And
Yeah.
I love the way that you articulated it. And I almost had like a little bit of embarrassment, like, oh, I guess I didn't see it from that side, which is why we're talking about it. So
Which side? What do you mean?
About having to be more strategic and what you needed to do in the workplace. And I love what you said about realizing that when I'm at work, I'm going to be there to build connections, and I need to find other places where I can really utilize my strengths so that I can accomplish what I need to do. I just think that's really insightful and very, very helpful. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I think there's also a grief of, I'm self-employed, and there's we're both therapists, and there's a limit of the number of clients that I can see, the number of impact that I can have. And so I think there's definitely grief on a personal level, but at times on a professional level that I don't have the capacity to see a lot of clients a week and still show up and be a really good therapist. So there's a little bit of grief around there sometimes. I think there's also, I guess it's just the awareness that like, okay, you're going to have to be more strategic, even down to, I'm trying to think of any area in my life now where I'm not strategic. And what's funny is I went through this period when I first found out I was an HSP and understood the trait. I went through this period of like really, first there was like grief and like bargaining and frustration. And then there was like, okay, I'm an HSP. There's this acceptance. And then this period happened where I actually didn't really feel the need to identify so highly as an HSP. And what happened is that I had been so strategic and intentional about crafting my life and my schedule, which I realize is a privilege in many ways, to minimize the challenging sides of being an HSP. But then what I have found is every time I've gone through a big transition, that's when grounding into this aspect of my identity has been so profoundly helpful to be like, okay, like even just as simple as traveling. Like I said, I'm from Alaska and I live in Colorado now. So, and I used to live in Durango, Colorado. And so flying from Durango to Alaska was easily like, with layovers and driving was easily like a 16-hour endeavor. And what I would do is like the next day I'd be like, okay, back to work. And it would destroy me. And so now it's strategic around travel. Like I'm really strategic around what flights I'm on, when I arrive, when I land, where I sit in the plane, right? Because certain parts are noisier than others. So that's like an example of like the strategy around being an HSP has been so infused in every area of my life that sometimes I don't even think about it until I go through a transition where I'm like, oh yeah, still sensitive, still have to think about this.
Right. And you and I had talked a couple months ago, and this is really what I wanted to talk about for this interview, because you had talked about, I don't really talk too much about being a highly sensitive person. I think you even said on your website, you don't talk about it. Is that correct?
I don't. I mean, if you read my blogs, a lot of them are my experiences as an HSP. But actually, when I think about my homepage and my about page, I don't actually have that in there. Mm-hmm. And what I found though is like mostly my clients just assume I am. But in my blogs, I talk about them a little bit, depending.
Right. And I remember being kind of astounded at, as I'm learning and growing about being an HSP and evolving in this process, which sometimes like I'm uncomfortable that people can see like 2 months ago, this is what I was talking about. Now I've kind of done a shift and a pivot. I've really had to allow a lot of grace for knowing that it's okay for me to evolve and grow and to change.
Yeah.
But I really spent a lot of time talking about being an empowered, knowledgeable HSP. And then you said this and I'm like, to not talk about being an HSP? And I've really been processing it. And what I believe and kind of where your comment has taken me is when we know what our traits are and what we need, we don't have to lead with, I'm an HSP, therefore I can't have fluorescent lights. I'm an HSP, therefore I can't work in an open floor plan. It's about knowing what works for us and just what you said of being very strategic. And it's not like saying, hi, I'm a Leo, so therefore I'm a very good leader, but this is what I'm an INFJ, so this is, like we don't lead with those labels. They may be helpful for us to identify, but when we know what our strengths are, then like you said, we can be very strategic, but communicate from a place of this is what works for me. This is what I'd like. This is how I approach life without having to lead with the label of being an HSP. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, you summed it up so well that instead, and this is where I would take it, is that I know I'm an HSP. Like I know to my core, and I'm so immersed in the world of HSP, right? Those are my clients. Those are my friends. Those are my animals. I'm so immersed in this world, and I've been so fortunate. So around just really seeking out HSP community, so that instead of leading with I'm an HSP, like you're saying, I just know what my needs are as an HSP. And so, for example, I was at a friend's house the other night and they had their music on kind of loud. And I had a hard time hearing them with the loud music. And my attention was like constantly divided. I didn't say to them, you know what? I have this trait. It's called sensory processing sensitivity. And so what it means, instead I just said like, hey, can I turn the music down so I could hear you better? That's all I did. Right. And then they were fine and I could hear them better and I was less overstimulated. And so that's maybe an example of like, sometimes I think we feel as HSPs this need to over-explain or, unfortunately apologize for the way that we are. And it's like, no, like this is just how you are. This is what you need. And sometimes I think it can be really vulnerable saying I'm an HSP because one, what is that? A lot of people don't get it. A lot of people think it means something that it doesn't. So it's easier on my nervous system. It's easier to just say, this is what my needs are so that there isn't room for interpretation. It makes it easier for them because they don't have to read my mind. I can just say in the situation, hey, can I turn the music down a notch so I can hear you better? Can I turn this light off? It's kind of bright. Or I don't know, I don't know why I'm thinking of like restaurants, right? Because like, I feel like restaurants are one of those situations where it's like, oh, it's so loud and it's so bright, but I want to see the people, see my friends.
Right. What I've been reflecting on while we were talking, I was trying to decide I wanted to talk about the questions we were going to do today. So I'm kind of doing this like, which way do we go? So let's just see where this goes.
Welcome to my life. When you were talking about I'm a Leo, I was like at a comedy show. This is just a fun little aside, but actually relevant. I was at a comedy show a week or so ago and the comedian talking about making fun of people that are like, I'm a Gemini, I blah, blah, blah. And I'm a Gemini. And so I do that sometimes. I'm like, so since I'm a Gemini, I have two minds about everything. When you're talking about, okay, which way, this duality, I'm like, you're talking inside my brain. That's me.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about is I've only learned I was an HSP in the last couple of years. And by that time I was in private practice. And so I look back, like I have twins that will be 20 this year. I worked in an open office. I had to go to court for my job. I like all of these things that are so not HS friendly. And I was thinking like, initially when we were talking, I was thinking, well, maybe I just wasn't woke then. But But I think a lot of it was, well, I think when I was younger, I probably, our sensitivity increases as we age. But I think I also was so unaware and I couldn't tell you what a feeling was. And I was really active in using food. Like I used food to cope all the time. And so I was reflecting as you were talking. So for those people that don't know that they're HSPs that are working and living in environments that really don't support them, how do we get by? And is it because we detach from our feelings or we don't know what we're feeling or we use electronics or overwork or overexercise or those things to manage? And there's no judgment in what we use. And, there's nothing wrong with work or exercise or being on our phone or food. It's just, is it adaptive or is it maladaptive? Right. And it's always going to be on a continuum. So for those of you that are judging yourselves and blaming yourselves for whatever you're doing or not doing, let's just drop that right now because this is just a conversation.
Yeah. So I've talked about this before in another interview, and I'm glad you brought this up, because I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, and that started probably when I was around 9 or 11. And looking back now, I know that on some level it was to manage being sensitive. And then once I got into treatment, I had an amazing therapist, right? It was funny because she didn't know what HSP was, but she specialized in eating disorders, and she saw a lot of people with eating disorders or people who use food as a way to self-soothe or feel sense of control tend to be on the more sensitive side. So that was definitely a way that I think I managed feeling overwhelmed, was soothing myself through food or having a sense of, just having, when you feel overwhelmed or overstimulated, life feels so out of control, right? For me, my eating disorder was all about feeling control, right? I mean, people who are like, when you're in it, it doesn't feel that way, but in retrospect, it can be like, how can I be in control when everything outside of me, everything within me just feels so out of control right now? And so that is definitely something I see, with my clients as well. And just looking at my own history, because I know now, even though I've been in recovery for a long time, if I feel myself going towards those behaviors, now what I ask myself is, am I overwhelmed? Am I overwhelmed? And chances are I am. And then I also think a factor that plays into it is like, when I am like hungry, I get hangry. Do you get hangry, Patricia?
When I'm not eating in a way that really works for my system, I've had to really tinker with my food. And if I'm getting enough of the right components of what really works for me, I don't get hangry. But if I'm not, then yes, I do get hangry.
Yeah. I can think of this fun memory where, a past partner I was with, I always have a snack with me, even if I'm heading out for like an hour. At one moment, I asked my partner, I'm like, should I bring a snack? And they're like, yes. I'm like, we're only going to be out for like a couple hours. And they're like, bring a snack. Because they knew what I was like when I was hungry. And I think a lot of that for me, I can't speak for other HSPs, is this sensitivity to nuance and sensitivity to my inner body sensations and how uncomfortable certain sensations can be and how they can set off this alarm system of like, oh my gosh. And so I get curious about, how having an eating disorder when I was younger and being in recovery now is all intertwined. It's still totally connected to being an HSP, undoubtedly.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's definitely a very high correlation between people that have addictions and being sensitive, because if we don't learn how to self-regulate and self-soothe, we're going to look to something outside of ourselves. And it often is stuff that really saves our lives, that had we not done that, then we wouldn't have been able to cope. I was thinking too that I think that, like, for me, having an eating disorder, thinking about when I was working, that the parts of me that can really compartmentalize, and so I could go to work and kind of put certain parts aside so that I could really focus and get my work done. And, and then I had compensatory behaviors that didn't really work. But I think that ability to compartmentalize really is a strength that we can use when we've done our work as HSPs. Because sometimes like my taskmaster does need to come out. Like I've got things that need to be done. And so the part of me that gets overwhelmed or sensitive, like she gets a voice and she gets to be honored. And my taskmaster is really good at getting stuff done when it's hard. And so I think on either side of any challenges that we've had with addictions or when we have used things that haven't worked, that there's a strength in that skill that we can bring forward that really works for us because we have amazing strengths as HSPs. And even though we need to come up with strategies, we can do all kinds of amazing things. And just because our nervous systems are wired differently doesn't mean that we can't live satisfying, fulfilling lives and achieve things.
I think there's this pain. You know, I'm thinking about just the gifts of being an HSP, which I feel like you're such a huge advocate of. Like, you know, and this is like sometimes we can advocate for our needs. And I really feel like you exemplify advocating for our strengths, not just what we need, but what our strengths are. And sometimes I wonder, you know, I'm thinking about when I was a sensitive kid, I wonder about there being a certain pain when we do have these gifts, when we do have these strengths as a sensitive person. I do wonder if there's a certain pain that comes when we don't get to express them. And I'm thinking about before you and I got the call, we checked in, like, how you feeling? And I'm just like, I'm just feeling everything. Right. And what I know now as an HSP is like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like I feel everything. And then I feel everything about everything that I feel. And I think about maybe when I was younger, though, not understanding that, not knowing words for that, and also not really leaning into the beauty of being able to feel such a rainbow, such a spectrum of emotions. I'm wondering if what you think about this idea of like there being a pain in not just being overstimulated and being in an unfit environment, you know, in an environment that isn't really helpful to your nervous system, but also there being any pain around these unexpressed gifts and strengths that HSPs have.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a huge part because, I mean, my experience and what I hear from other people is we didn't feel seen and heard. And we show up in the world as these caring, sensitive beings. And when our parents or caregivers don't understand it, they don't know how to teach us how to co-regulate. We're in systems that don't really value the skills that we have. And our society is very extroverted. It's very verbally process oriented. It's very success oriented. The skills that we bring to the world are soft skills. We're able to connect. We're great listeners. We're leaders. You know, our creative talents. We can be very successful, but oftentimes what our gifts are much harder to measure. They're harder to see. And so we have this sense of like, who I am isn't okay. And that can be incredibly painful. And those wounds come back and visit us as adults. Even when we've done our work, we just get to work with it as it comes up.
I feel like what really was pivotal for me around shifting was finding community, right? Because it's hard to feel like there's something wrong with you when there is a bunch of people that feel the same way, right? And also, I had a great therapist. She didn't know what HSPs were before working with me. I mean, but she did, right? She did because she worked with people with eating disorders. She told me this, that, you know, before I would come into session, she'd close the window. She would turn the blinds down. She was just like so conscientious. And it was just like those little things, right? And that's the thing, I think, I don't know why I'm getting a little emotional thinking about this, thinking about, you know, her is like, as a sensitive person, you don't need much. You just need people to meet you where you're at in just little ways, little and big ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my head wants to go in like 5 different directions. And so it's just kind of going into like, oh, let's just lose track of everything right now and get distracted.
I know,
with
and
something.
I'm like crying I'm like getting emotional for some reason, but like, that's like, you know, it's just like I don't have words for it, but it's just the feeling.
Well, what I think I hear you saying is when somebody really honors how we show up in the world and knows that we do better with certain things in the environment because we're in the minority, because systems are set up to not understand us, because we tend to create relationships before we know better, where people reinforce that we're too much, we're too needy, things like that, that we've got these wounds that, and I don't know how to talk about this. I feel like I'm going to be really messy with my words. Wounding is not bad. If we're alive, we're going to have wounding. It's about being willing to talk about it, look at it, explore it. I mean, before we started recording, I wanted to talk about something and it didn't resonate with you. And because it's something that I'm kind of working through right now, my energy dropped and you noticed that. And because of the relationship that you and I have, I was able to say like, I think I felt some shame about what came up because it feels vulnerable and I'm trying to understand it. And your response was really different. That's where we get this sense of connection and a reality check. Had I not done my work, my energy probably would have been down for the whole interview. I may have taken a step back in our relationship if I didn't have the awareness that this is something that's tender for me. And because you didn't identify with it, it triggers shame for me.
Yeah.
For the listeners, I have somebody I am going to be coming on and talking about this. So hold tight and you will hear more about it. But I think that gift of connection comes when we've done our work, stuff comes up, but we can talk about it and move through it without having it create, a shutdown, disconnect, withdrawal. And sometimes we do need to do that in order to figure out what's going on. So I'm not saying if we do those things, but we can experience a full range of feelings and emotions, stuff that we like and stuff that we don't like, and still navigate very well. And when we have other people that have done their work, like you said, that's where this magic of just feeling seen and mirrored and validated can be so incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of goes back to like, it doesn't matter in my mind, like it doesn't matter why you need the need. I mean, it does, but why? But just if it's a need and you can advocate for it. They have this thing in this modality I'm learning where they talk about, they talk about parts and they talk about speaking for the part and from the part, right? And so that kind of what was coming to mind as you were talking, Patricia, was like, you were able, it sounds like you were able to give a little bit to hold this feeling, to hold it with care, and to also like advocate and speak for it, as opposed to, when I'm acting on my wounding, I'm not thinking consciously, but when I'm like aware of my wounding and I can give it some space and attention and just a tiny bit of separation, then I can advocate for it. Is that
right? And why don't you just say what it is that you're doing so everybody knows? Yeah.
Internal Family Systems, IFS. Yes, I'm going through that training right now.
Yeah, which is really, really powerful. And I think especially, there are lots of different modalities that work for HSPs, but it's that difference of speaking for the part and coming from the part. And that's where we create that sense of mindfulness, that disconnect to it's happening to me, to this is what's going on and this is how I'm wanting to react or respond. And I'm open to seeing that even though it feels like you're doing something to me or this is something I've experienced in the past, that maybe this is a different experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Very powerful. And it's interesting when we were talking earlier about the grief that you were experiencing around, I can only see so many clients. I can only have so much of an impact based on the resources that I have. I've really been grappling with that recently with the online HSP courses, because so much of the healing work comes from getting reality checks in the group and the process that happens during the group. And I could, do 50 podcast episodes and write 12 books about
Please
it.
Do.
But
Please.
Because it's...
I read them.
You're so sweet. How can I create that experience? Because it's experiential. And I think as we're talking about, coming from our parts or how do we work through this wounding that we have that we often don't even know that we have. And it takes working with a coach or a therapist or in a group to see what comes up, because when we're coming from that part, it just feels like this is what the reality is. And we keep suffering because we keep perceiving these situations that are happening, and it may not actually be happening the way that we think that it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is that place that I warned you about. So we just totally switch gears and go to something new. Just embracing the imperfect process and modeling how we just go with the flow. Arianna and I had kind of a side conversation that something came up that we're just going to cut out, and I don't know how to make a smooth transition. So you're just going to come along from the ride, and we're just going to start with something else. We're just going to totally jump gears here. Arianna, I didn't ask you, but with the term highly sensitive person, is there another term that you wish were used?
I really, you've talked about the DOES acronym on here before. I feel like one of the hallmark traits of like HSPs is the depth of processing. And for me, that would be, I feel like highly sensitive person. I feel like that term sometimes doesn't capture the depth of processing. So I don't know what the term would be. That's something that sometimes sometimes HSP it doesn't feel like it fully captures my experience as an HSP because it doesn't capture the depth of processing and the nuance of all the ways that I feel and think and interpret a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I need to talk about what's going on in my brain. I was imagining for the listener that we were really deep in conversation and then something came up. And then to be honest, I just kind of couldn't remember where we were and couldn't pick it up. And so I just totally jumped gears. And I feel like we were cruising on the highway at 65 miles an hour. And now we're in third gear putzing through town. And it was a really bumpy transition. And I don't know how to do it differently, but I just want to name that I'm feeling like, I would have liked to have done that differently. And given the current skill set that I have, I just don't think I can.
Okay. I apologize for my part in that.
No. It's totally fine. And yeah, I think I get so in the moment with things that then I don't even know where I was because it's like it was almost a flow state for me, which is a good thing. Like when you're in flow, you're not in anxiety and you're not in depression, you're in flow. So it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges that you experience as an HSP? You've kind of talked about some of these, but is there anything else that you want to bring up?
I think maybe ones that I haven't talked most about is I think I've touched upon all of them some way around the work environment, being around loud noises or bright light, just feeling maybe a little bit different or like my needs are different or a little misunderstood. I think one of the, being a more extroverted HSP, but by no means being an extrovert in any way, right? I think one of the biggest challenges is just really wanting to have the energy for all the amazing people in my life and all the connections and all the possibilities and just having to temper that with what is realistic. I think if I were an introverted, and I can't speak, I'm not an introverted HSP, I think it might be easier to be a little bit more discerning. But like as an extroverted HSP, I'm just like, I just want to know all the people. And I don't want to know all the people. That might be a superlative, but I want to probably be more social than my nervous system can comfortably handle. So that's definitely a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
It's like, I think one of my wishes would be that my energy would be consistent. And sometimes like I'm really outgoing and I love doing new things and being out. And other times I'm just like, just can't do it and got to wait until I'm in the mood to pop on and do a video or to do a bonus episode. Like I feel like I just have to really like, okay, this is where we're at today.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of your strengths?
Well, I have a fun story about this, and it relates to the depth of processing. One of my past jobs was working and managing a domestic violence shelter in like a rural area. I had to manage grants. I had to do reports. I had to supervise folks. I had to oversee the shelter, and I had to write policies. I don't know how this nickname came about, but I was dubbed either in one way or another, like worst case scenario Ari, because I was like, okay, let's think about the worst case scenario in this way. And in this case, right, when you're working with domestic violence, like the worst case scenario is pretty serious. That was an environment where I felt like, okay, my ability to see all sides of a situation and really feel deeply and think deeply into that was really, really, really embraced and beneficial, a great fit with that job that I had, because ultimately my job was to help keep people safe. This ability to think about all the ways that wouldn't happen was informed into the procedures that I had to write, or the trainings that I would have to do, and more like that. And there's obviously like there's a dark side to that, but that's been an opportunity where my depth of processing has just felt really beneficial, is when I do have to think about all sides of a situation.
Yeah, well, we're great troubleshooters, forecasters, predictors. Mm-hmm. It really is an amazing strength because we do have this ability. I mean, for me, the sad thing is I automatically go to the worst case scenario, and then I have to go like, okay, what's another option here? And I often will work with my clients who are anxious that, well, what's the best possible outcome? I could get my needs met. I could have fun. It might be really satisfying and fulfilling. So there's certainly a way to work with it, but I definitely see that as being a strength because we can anticipate all kinds of things.
Yeah.
What do you do for play?
Ooh, well, I have a puppy right now. I spend so much time with my puppy. And puppies, like small animals, are just pure play. I really feel like that's such a wonderful gift of this little fur ball to keep me playing and keep me present. I find a lot of play through being in nature, right? So being present in nature, hiking or camping. I love my family and I don't get to see them as often as I'd like. But going home to my family, I have 2 nieces that are under the age of 4. And so there's nothing like being around kids to keep you playful. And then I joke, my dad is just a large child in an adult's body. So I fortunately have a lot of playfulness in my family. And I also experience a lot of play through my relationships with people, just joking and laughing and just being in connection with others.
Yeah, I just interviewed.
What about you?
Sorry, my brain's just gone all over the place this morning. I find play to be more intellectual than romping fun, although I love kayaking and swimming and being in the ocean. It just takes a little bit more for me to get there. I love sailing. Walking my dog every day is something that I really enjoy, and I've just decided that my husband walks her in the evening and I walk her in the morning, but I've been really making a concerted effort to walk her twice a day, because it's just a nice break in the afternoon from my workflow to get out. And then connecting with other people, I really think that that's probably one of the most fulfilling ways that I fill up, is by connecting with other people. Yeah.
I would say learning is a big way that I play. Mm-hmm. I just love learning about new topics, about different topics, reading, that kind of, I do want to, when you brought that up, I was like, oh yeah, that's like my little brain playing. It's like, ooh, all these new ideas. And when you bring in that HSP side of things, it's just so deep and enriching to be able to mull over all sides of something, and how does it apply to this, and how does it apply to that?
Yeah, I think HSPs, not all of us, but I have this theory that I think we like being students. And I think for those of us that had good experiences in school works because there's rules and there's structure and there's stuff that we learn, and we don't have to worry about do I share this? Do I not share this? So I think school is one of the ways for some of us that we really excel at because of the depth of processing and the structure. And
I think also with learning, there's a sense of mastery, right? There's a sense of progress around okay, I did not know this before, and now I know this. Yeah. So I think it just builds confidence too.
Yeah. And Dr. Aaron talks about HSPs are really good at making new connections. And so I think that we can take information and we can find new ways to apply it, and ways to attach to things that we already knew that are novel, that are really stimulating for us. Yeah. Is there something that someone said to you about being an HSP that felt hurtful or insensitive that you're comfortable sharing?
You know, before this interview, I thought about answering this question in one way, but now being in the moment and having deeply like my little processing happening in the background, I think actually a lot of harm comes from what people don't say, from reading between the lines. So, and that's just part of, for me, is just like picking up on subtleties, picking up on what's not said, picking up on the way things are said. And so I can think of a few examples, multiple examples, where things might have been said that were negative and related to the trait. I think the way I've handled that is just really grounding into community, really just knowing like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. This is just how I am as a highly sensitive person.
Is there something that you'd want to say back to somebody? I mean, even if it's a composite?
That's hard I don't know if I have a clear answer for that.
Okay. No pressure.
Yeah, I don't know, because I'm thinking about all the different environments. I think maybe just like, I wish if there were one answer for all those people, it'd be like, gosh, I wish you got to know me, right? Because I think those painful things are said from an assumption, right? Or said from how you may appear when you're not actually like in your optimal environment. So I think that would be like, gosh, I wish you could have known me in the right environment. I wish you could have known the real me. I wish you could have understood me, I guess would be the things that I would say.
I like that. Yeah, I had something happen recently where I was naming something that felt really important and two people kind of laughed. I didn't catch it in the moment and it really ended up hurting my feelings. And it's something I'm not going to talk about on the podcast. I'm not going to say more about it just because of I want to have people in my life and I don't have to talk about everything. If it were to happen again, I'd say, ouch, because it did feel hurtful. And, like sometimes that stuff happens. So I find other places to go to have somebody go like, yeah, that really sucks. And I go, yeah, I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's all about, I think maybe it's like some people can hear that and some can't.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for HSPs and just I'm thinking of in the relationships and the connection that we build is like, there needs to be that space to say ouch and to say, I'm sorry. And to say like, let me try to do it different next time. And to say, this is what I needed in that moment.
Yeah. And there are some complicated dynamics around this. So that's just kind of the easiest way to say it. But yeah, I totally hear you.
Okay. I'm speaking general. I don't know what situation you're talking about, but in general.
I know. I'm just deciding there are a lot of things that I need to stop talking about on the podcast. So I'm trying to show some restraint and maturity. We're about out of time. Is there anything that you want to say that I haven't asked you that you feel like it's important to mention?
No, I'm just so grateful I got to get on here with you. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. You've been so helpful for me as I've grown my process and checking in with you and having you look at my stuff and giving me feedback. You really have that gift. And it's a strength that I certainly do not have. Ari, where can people find you and anything you have to offer that people can know about? And this will all be in the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com. Just go to the podcast page and click on Arianna's episode.
As much as I might try otherwise, I work with HSPs. Private practice, just working with them around what you and I talked about, around what are your needs?
Yeah.
Like, can you can we be unapologetic about your needs and how can we assert them and how can you craft this life that works for you, not what other people say it should be.
If you need any help with writing copy, Arianna's amazing. So go to her. Did you give your website? One of the programs that I recorded and stopped recording while you were talking. So you did not have my full attention. Did you give your website?
Yes,
okay.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I had a moment of panic there, actually.
I call that when my brain blinks. like my brain just blinked for a moment and I missed.
Well, no, the program that I'm recording and stopped recording, like all of a sudden it wasn't recording. And so I had a little internal freak out moment there. So,
no.
Yeah. Is there anything else before we go?
No, just thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
And just thanks to all the listeners too.
Yeah. Yeah. For all the HSPs out there that we're all just showing up and doing the best that we can and living our lives with lots of deep feels and lots of joy and lots of other stuff. Like that's the best we can do and it's good enough. And
we're all still figuring it out, right?
Yep.
I'm still figuring it out.
I think that, when we live the peaceful, blissful life, as my friend Jen Perry says, those are dead people goals. Seriously.
That, actually that thing reminds me of something that I've written about before is that, avoiding overstimulation completely isn't the goal. The goal is to manage it, because if you are living life, if you are having new experiences, if you are connecting deeply, if you are taking risks, you're going to get overstimulated at times, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I like that idea. I liked what Jen had to say.
Yeah.
That speaks to my philosophy.
Yep. We don't want dead people goals.
No.
That's the new motto.
Thanks so much, Patricia.
All right. Thanks, Ari. Have a great day. Hey again. So I'm wondering what you thought of the episode. I have no control over my recording right now. My husband's sitting in the other room talking on the phone. The dog is barking. We're just going to go with it. If anything in this episode resonated for you and you want somebody to talk to or to work with, I work with people online globally. You can find out more at unapologeticallysensitive.com. It's great to be able to work from the comfort of your own home. If you're curious about the online HSP course that I run, again, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and go to the HSP group page and find more information. I run these groups a few times a year. They've been incredibly transformative, and I just really love being able to watch people grow and develop as HSPs and really internalize the strengths that they have. And there is something incredibly powerful that happens in a group experience when we find our people and we really feel seen and heard. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Currently, it's 2020. If you're listening to this in the future, I'm not sure if this is still going to be true, but I do a meetup on the first Saturday of every month in San Diego. There's information in the show notes, or you can go to meetup.com. Thank you so much for being here, for being a listener. Being a highly sensitive person, a deep thinker, a deep feeler, does come with its challenges. And I think that there are lots of ways that we can learn to do well, to manage, to really have fulfilling, satisfying lives. We just need to lean into the downs and enjoy the ups. And it sure seems like when we have a few people around us that really get who we are, it makes a difference. So my hope is that you're getting some of that from this podcast, that sense of connection and belonging and a deeper understanding that whatever it is that goes on with you is really typical if you're an HSP. We're all different, and there's so much that we share that's in common. So I just wanted to really say thank you so much for being here with me today. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.